So I'm Deb Music, and I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing for Theo Chocolate. We are in the only organic fair trade certified chocolate factory in the entire United States. We're very excited and proud to be here. We're also the only small independently owned artisan roaster of cacao in the whole country. And we've built our factory here in Seattle because Seattle has an incredibly progressive foodie community. When you come in for a factory tour, you're able to see how chocolate's made from bean to bar. We start over here in this room. This is our bean room. And when the beans come into our factory, the last hands to touch the beans were the farmer's hands in the country of origin. And the beans are cleaned in this room. This big machine that you see is called a destoner. What that means is literally that it's taking the stones as well as other detritus out, because what happens is when the beans are fermented and dried, it's a very precise but also a very crude process, because these are poor farmers in countries who are using whatever means they have to dry their cacao. So they spread the beans out on their lawns, their driveways, their patios, and when they scoop them up to put them in the sacks, they're scooping up all kinds of miscellaneous stuff. So the destoner literally separates the beans from stones, dirt, gum wrappers, nails, cigarette butts, all kinds of miscellaneous stuff comes along. And we actually have a collection upstairs of, nifty things like gum wrappers from the Ivory Coast, etc. We'll put them on display at some point. And once the beans have been cleaned, they come into this room for roasting. So this is our beautiful 1930s vintage ball roaster. And what we do here at Theo is a two-roast process. A lot of chocolate manufacturers roast the beans whole, but we feel that doing a two-roast process gives us a more even roast because the beans actually vary in size. So we do a first roast, which serves to take whatever humidity is left in the bean out, and that enables us to separate the very papery husk around the nib inside from the bean more efficiently. So after this first roast, these beans have just had their first roast. They're cooling. They'll go into this machine over here, which is called the winnower. And the winnower will actually crack the bean and separate the papery husk from the nib inside the bean. The cocoa bean has this very papery husk, which if you crack it...
We're gonna have to bring this...
Okay, I need two hands. If you crack it, you can see there's this papery husk on the outside, which actually makes great garden mulch. And then this beautiful brown glossy nib inside. The nib is about 55% pure cocoa butter, cocoa fat, and about 45% cocoa solid. So if you expeller press that nib, you would have pure cocoa butter on one hand and a block of solid cocoa powder on the other. So what happens after the bean has its first roast is it goes into the winnower. The winnower actually cracks the bean and then separates the cracked bean, which we now call the nib, from the papery husk. And when it comes out of the winnower, it looks just like this. These are roasted cocoa nibs. They're beautiful, and these are absolutely delicious. The reason that everyone's talking about how chocolate's good for you is because of all of the antioxidant properties, and it's a very magnesium-rich food. It has a lot of flavonoids in it. It's the nib, it's the bean that's really good for you. So roasted cocoa nibs are sort of one of the new superfoods. You can use them in cooking in exactly the way you would the same way that you would use nuts. So, we sprinkle them on salads, we put them in oatmeal, we bake them in cookies, we, encrust flank steak with them. This is also kind of the hot new ingredient for chefs. So there are chefs all over Seattle now who are using our nibs in some of their recipes. And one of the things that Theo is really excited about is really fully exploring cacao in savory applications, because everyone thinks of chocolate as a sweet food. But the roasted cocoa bean, different beans from different regions have incredibly complex flavors, and there's an incredible variety of flavors. So that's one of the things we're going to really be be promoting and helping people learn about here. The next step in the manufacturing process is that those beautiful roasted nibs need to be refined. And the first step in that process is our stone mill. So the beans are put into this big hopper funnel, and there are two large grinding stones in the center that begin the process of applying heat and friction to the nibs, which serves to release the fat particles and liquefy the chocolate, essentially. Because remember, I explained that that nib is about 55% fat. So when you apply a lot of friction to it, it starts to melt. So the chocolate comes down out of the stone mill, and now it looks like chocolate as we know it. You can see there are there's some coarse particles in there. Some of that is the fat starting to separate, but this is the first stage in the refining process. And at this point, we call it chocolate liquor. It has nothing to do with alcohol. That's just what it's called in the manufacturing process. The next step is that liquor goes into this second refiner. This is called a ball mill. And this tank right here has thousands of tiny little metal BBs that whirl at extremely high speeds and continue that grinding process. And when the nibs are finished in the ball mill, the particle size is 12 microns, which is the same size as a red blood cell. And what that means is that that finished chocolate is going to have an incredibly smooth mouthfeel. The 12 microns basically says that there's not going to be any granularity at all to the chocolate to the finished chocolate. Okay, now what has to happen is that finished chocolate, that finished liquor, needs to be mixed with sugar and or milk powder if we're making milk chocolate. So about 2/3 of this liquor remain in this tank and wait to meet up with the sugar. And about 1/3 of that liquor is carried over into this mixer. And this is where we dump in sugar and or milk powder if we're making milk chocolate. The reason that we have to add some liquor in is because the sugar and the milk particles don't have enough fat content to actually efficiently get through our refining equipment. They would just spray out all over the place. They're too dry. So the chocolate liquor acts as kind of a carrier for the sugar to get it through the refiners. So it gets mixed up in that drum up there, and then it comes up down this chute and onto this belt. And when it spills out onto this belt, it's kind of a coarse, clumpy, dark brown. It's like if you took table sugar and you coated it in liquid chocolate, it looks like that would look. And it's fed down in between the first two rolls here. This machine is called our 5-roller. It has 5 rolls that spin in opposite directions. And that sugar chocolate mixture is carried up, it weaves up like a ribbon through the different rolls, which are applying tremendous heat and friction. It spins at about 400 RPMs. And when it comes out the other end of this machine, it's called flake. And what's happened is that sugar has now been refined so that the surface area has increased so dramatically. It looks like instant cocoa mix. So it's this very, very fine, it's like confectioner's sugar. It's like a powder, and we call it flake. You can see a little flake residue sort of drop down right here. It's impossible to clean it all up. But remember, it went in as that kind of wet, clumpy mixture. And because we've increased the surface area so much on the sugar now, that original batch of liquor, the fat isn't enough to coat all the particles anymore. So now it looks like a powder.